The bitter truth. A sharp ache twisted in her stomach, and she clutched her side, a flood of questions racing through her mind. Could it be? Am I? Mary dreaded the answer, but her instincts told her otherwise. The signs were there: nausea, fatigue, mood swings, and no matter how she tried to ignore them, they only grew stronger. Could I be pregnant? Mary whispered to herself, heart pounding. But the thought that followed made her stomach twist even more. This wasn't her husband's child. No, she hadn't been with him enough for that to be possible. A whirlwind of guilt and fear overtook her as she thought of her boss, the man she had secretly entertained in the shadows of her marriage. Their stolen moments, once thrilling, now filled her with dread. Mary bit her lip, her mind racing. If her husband found out? She couldn't let that happen. If James, her husband, suspected, everything would fall apart. She had to act quickly. She made up her mind to fix things in a way that would erase any doubts. For the next few weeks, she poured herself into the role of the devoted wife, doting on James, her husband, being as affectionate as she could, and making sure they shared their bed often. The plan seemed to be working, and she started to relax, until she began to notice other, more concerning symptoms. It was more than nausea now. Her energy seemed to drain day by day, and a strange pain throbbed under her ribs. Finally, she decided she couldn't ignore it any longer. "I need a checkup," she told her husband one morning, forcing a smile. "Would you take me to the hospital?" When they arrived at the hospital, her husband took her hand and led her inside. "While we're here, I might as well get checked out too," he said, attempting a reassuring smile. "It's been a while since I had a full checkup." She nodded absently, barely paying attention. Her focus was entirely on what the doctor might discover. She assured herself it was probably just exhaustion or a minor infection, nothing serious. After a few tests, the doctor looked at her with a deeply serious expression. "Can I speak with your husband alone for a moment?" he asked gently. Panic filled her. The doctor didn't give a patient's partner news unless it was serious. She glanced at her husband as he followed the doctor into his office, and a strange, gnawing fear filled her heart. Her mind ran wild, imagining the worst. She waited in the hallway, her anxiety building with every passing second. When her husband finally emerged, his face was pale, and his eyes seemed full of sorrow and fear. "Is everything okay?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's fine," he answered, managing a weak smile. "Nothing to worry about. Just get some rest. The doctor said you need to take it easy." But he couldn't hide the haunted look in his eyes. She knew he was lying, but why? And what was he hiding? From that day forward, he was different. He seemed more distant, but at the same time, she noticed him working harder, taking on extra jobs, and borrowing money from friends. One evening, she overheard him speaking to a friend on the phone, his voice full of desperation. "It's for someone I love," he said, his voice cracking. "They needed to live." She felt a mix of confusion and anger. Why was he doing all this for her but not telling her the truth? Her mind twisted the situation, turning it into something dark. Could he be sick himself and hiding it from her? Her suspicions grew when she overheard two nurses whispering at the hospital one afternoon. "It's a terrible case," one of them said. "Last-stage liver cancer, the person needs a transplant, but it's so expensive." "Doesn't the husband know?" the other nurse asked with sympathy. "It's tragic. $500,000 is a lot to raise. Poor man's been trying everything he can." Her heart froze. She immediately assumed it was her husband who was sick, and he'd kept it hidden from her. How dare he keep something so serious a secret? A bitter rage built inside her. She felt betrayed, furious that James would leave her in the dark. And the more she thought about it, the angrier she became. In her mind, he became a selfish man, hiding his sickness and dragging her along in his suffering. If he was going to treat her like this, she thought bitterly, then she had the right to make her own choices. A week later, she discovered that her husband had finally gathered the $5,000 he needed. She found the money in a drawer, hidden away, and without a second thought, she took it. "This is better spent on something worthwhile," she muttered. "Why should I waste this on him if he doesn't even have the decency to tell me he's sick?" Without a hint of hesitation, she gathered the money and stuffed them into her purse. Her mind was racing with plans, ways she could put that money to use. As far as she was concerned, it was better off funding something she deemed truly important. It felt like a small triumph, a reclaiming of control in a marriage she believed had been holding her back. She dialed her brother's phone number, the one person she trusted in moments like this. "Hello? David, I've got something for you," she said with a sly smile, her voice brimming with satisfaction. David's tone turned curious. "What do you mean? Did something happen?" "Let's just say I found a bit of a windfall. I'll bring it over today. This will help you get that car you wanted," she said, convinced that supporting her brother was far more worthwhile than spending it on her husband, who she assumed was hiding something from her. That afternoon, she handed over the money to David, never once doubting her decision. She told herself that if her husband was willing to keep his illness from her, then he didn't deserve her sympathy or her help. Her brother took the money without hesitation, knowing she'd been unhappy with her husband for a while now. And with that, she packed up her things, determined to leave her marriage and start fresh. She returned to her mother's house, feeling liberated, free from the burden of her husband's secrets. A few hours later, her husband showed up at her mother's house, his face lined with desperation. "Please," he begged, voice trembling, "I need that money. It's for a matter of life and death." But she laughed in his face. "Why should I give you anything?" she taunted. "Better to spend it on something that will last than to throw it away on you." Her mother and brother joined in, mocking him as he pleaded. "How dare you come here demanding money from my daughter," her mother shouted. "You've brought her nothing but misery. A loser like you." Her brother scoffed. "You think you're fooling us? We know you're just using her to save yourself. Go find someone else who will suffer with you. My sister is not ready for this rubbish." Just then, her husband's phone rang. He glanced at it, and before he could answer, Mary snatched it from his hand. She wanted to humiliate him even more. "Hello? We found a donor," the doctor's voice came through, urgent and relieved. "Please bring her to the hospital as soon as possible. We can do the transplant today." She laughed bitterly. "Keep your donor," she snapped, a cruel smile spreading across her face. "We don't want it. We don't need your money or your pity." Her husband looked as though she had slapped him. He slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out a medical report, his hand shaking. "It was never about me," he said, voice choked with emotion. He held the report toward her, eyes pleading. This is yours." Mary's heart stopped. She stared at the paper, her mind refusing to process what she was seeing. "Liver cancer, final stage." The words blurred before her eyes, and yet she shook her head, refusing to believe it. "This is a lie," she screamed, tearing the report to shreds and throwing it at him. "You're trying to trick me." Days turned into weeks, and although she tried to carry on, she couldn't deny what her body was telling her. The pain under her ribs worsened, and a dull weakness settled into her bones. Her family, once so full of confidence, grew more fearful as her health visibly declined. In desperation, her mother finally took her to the hospital. But the doctor could only shake his head sadly. "If only we'd done this sooner," he murmured. "There was a window, but it's too late now." Reality crashed down on her like a storm. The bitter truth she'd fought so hard to deny was now undeniable. Her actions, her anger, her blindness, they had all led her here. She had taken the chance she once had and destroyed it. In her final days, regret was her only companion. She thought back to her husband's quiet sacrifices, his loving patience, and how she had betrayed him in her bitterness. She remembered the look in his eyes as he tried to tell her the truth, and how she had laughed, scorned him, and walked away. When she finally passed away, the house was filled with silence. Her mother, her brother, and her husband were left with nothing but their grief and guilt, haunted by the choices they had made, knowing that forgiveness would be impossible. In the end, the silence in the house was a heavy presence, pressing down on each of them. Her mother wept quietly, clutching a framed photo of her daughter, realizing all the time she'd scolded her for living selfishly, never imagining she'd be gone so soon. The grief gnawed at her, a painful reminder of missed moments to heal the rift between them. Her brother, David, stood in a corner, his face pale and his hands trembling. The car he'd bought with her husband's hard-earned money now seemed a hollow achievement, a bitter symbol of the trust he'd broken. The memory of her last smile haunted him, that one glimpse of her joy as she handed him the money, unaware of the consequences her actions would bring. The guilt clawed at him, as he realized his own selfishness had only deepened her struggles, her choices leading down a path she could never return from. Her husband sat alone, his head in his hands, barely able to comprehend the truth. He had spent every last bit of his savings trying to support her, only to be left betrayed and broken. He had loved her, despite her faults, and had wanted to help her heal. The realization that she'd thought him the one in need, even as her illness went untreated, crushed him. Each of them, bound by regret, knew that forgiveness was beyond reach. There was nothing left but the emptiness she had left behind and the questions that would haunt them forever. The weight of what had been lost, love, trust, and a chance at redemption, settled on them like a shadow, a reminder of a life cut short by secrets and misunderstandings. Thank you for watching. We hope you were captivated by the story. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, CHUKWUDI ALAULOR STUDIO, for more engaging and unforgettable tales. Don't forget to like, share, and leave a comment below. Thank you once again.
Like and subscribe.